Perspective is simply a word which means how something looks from a particular position. If I change my position, if I change where I'm standing, then how the object appears will also change in some way. But when it comes to drawing and perspective, probably most of us think of diagrams something like this and videos that talk about eye levels and horizons and vanishing points and perspective lines and so forth. But the good news is if we're not drawing from our imagination, if when we draw, we either draw from life or we draw from reference photos, then this strictly isn't so relevant and we don't really need to worry about vanishing points and so forth. Let me explain a very simple way of understanding perspective that for many artists will be all they ever need to know. When we see a building straight on, the horizontal lines are all horizontal and we don't see the sides. But if we shift our position, if we shift the perspective that we have when we see the building, if we move slightly to the side, then suddenly these straight lines become angled, and they can angle at different angles on different sides of the building. And the more angled our view of the building becomes, then the more angled these angles become. The angles become more extreme, whichever side of the building we're looking at. But the other important thing to remember is that while when we look at a building straight on, all the horizontal lines are horizontal, when we look at a building at an angle, we only get one horizontal line, and that's called the eye level. And if we look at the brickwork lines, we can see where that is. There's no actual line, but it's going to be about here. And above this line, our perspective angles angle in one direction, and below this line, they angle in another direction. And they meet on the eye level. But because they usually meet well off the page, they're not very helpful when we're drawing. Because even if we wanted to try and work out exactly where they were, we wouldn't have enough paper. So in practice, what we need to do is learn to observe the angle, and then from that observation, to draw it. So we can look at the line, and we can do our best to draw the angle. And one way of checking our angle is to use our pen or pencil as a measuring device. And that's not too far off, but the real line is more like this. And if I get the line wrong, I always put a correcting line over the top because I find it's better to have the right angle. And again, for this line here, we can do it this way. Put a dot, check, and that one looks more correct. I haven't had to plot vanishing points or anything like that. And there we have that wall. This is a very simple cottage. And we really only have one clear line above and below our eye level line, which of course doesn't have to be in the center of our building. It just happens to be in this case. So I want to quickly show you one more example just to show you the bigger picture and let you see the pattern, which I think is the key to being able to draw really nice, accurate perspective. And we'll use this church. It's often helpful to find eye level. This line angles up. This line angles down. It's somewhere in between. It's going to be about here because I was across the road and the ground was sloping down in front of the church. Now, therefore, there are very few lines below eye level, but we can see that they angle up towards eye level. But there are lots of lines above eye level, and I'll just highlight some of them. And we can see that these red lines will all join up on the white line, some way off the paper. And there's two things it's helpful to note. The most important one is what I call the fan pattern. See how these angles fan upwards. The angle of each one becomes larger. Or if there were more lines the other way, it would be the same. And this is the pattern we need to remember and we need to look for when we're drawing a building, where the perspective, the position we view it from, is creating these really strong angles. We need to realize that the higher the line goes, the steeper the angle becomes, even if by a little bit. And I think of a fan where all the ribs of the fan go back and join at the point where you hold it. None of these lines are parallel. And that's the important thing to remember. Never draw these lines parallel. Never draw them as if they're like this, all at the same angle. We need to make sure that as we move away from wherever the eye level is, wherever our horizontal line is, that the angles increase. And sometimes these angles can end up being very steep lines indeed. And that's okay. If that's the angle that this perspective causes, that this viewing position causes, then that's the angle we need to draw. And quite obviously we can see the fan pattern here. And the other point to realize is that when we have parts of a building that line up on the horizontal line, such as the bottoms of these windows, then they will also line up on the same perspective angle. So it's not just lines that are the top and the bottom of the building that we need to worry about, but it's things such as the top and the bottom of windows that all line up on a horizontal line. Their perspective angles need to fit the pattern and line up as well. Now, that's more obvious with windows, but when we look at a building such as this church, if we were looking straight onto the church, this little bit here and this little bit here would be on the same horizontal line. And therefore, when we look at the perspective angles of the building, then we need to fit them into the same pattern of perspective angles that increase as the line moves further away from our eye level. And of course, this happens in both directions. It also happens with all the angles that go in the other direction, including these points of detail here. And if we remember the pattern that the horizontal lines are at a steeper and steeper angle as they move away from eye level, it helps us to see these in our reference photo or in real life. And that helps us to draw them more accurately. We don't so much need to work out how we can apply this as understand the pattern, look for it, observe it, and then draw accurately what we see. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope this has been helpful for you. Perspective is often a very unnecessarily confusing subject for artists who like to draw buildings. Although, of course, perspective involves anything we see, not just buildings. But with buildings, it's somehow more obvious. I hope you found this helpful, and next time you go to draw, makes the process a little more enjoyable. But whatever you're drawing, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.